All right, we're live. Hello, everyone. Another weekly live stream here. I was just looking at these events that exist in the Laravel Shift application. So let's back up a second, though. So what I'm going to work on today is, after last week's stream, I realized that part of the process of renewing a Workbench license is the, automatic renewal for people that are part of a Shifty plan. So Shifty plan is basically a subscription to Shift. It gets you access to a certain amount of included shifts or certain types of included shifts, mostly the Laravel upgrade shifts, things like the fixer, the test generator, stuff like that. So specifically when it comes to the Workbench, though, the latest plan, which gives you access to the latest Laravel shift, in this case Laravel 9.x. Next January it'll be the 10.x. But to kind of sweeten that deal a little bit, you also get a license to the Workbench. Now, since the Workbench has been out a year, people that have subscribed, it hasn't been a big deal. I just issue them a Workbench license as part of their subscription creation. But when they renew here in a couple weeks, potentially, after it's been a year since the Workbench release, their license is going to be expired, but their subscription will continue. So that's what I'm going to work on today. I need to kind of fix that boundary case or gap or incomplete code is probably the best way to put it. So that's what I'm going to be working on. I need to determine when a subscription is renewed and effectively issue them a new Workbench license if they have the latest plan. So that's what we're going to do today. So yeah, hey, Surab, what's going on, man? So thanks for joining live. Let's get into it. So the first thing I want to do is basically just get checkout-b. And let's just call this like Shifty plan license or renewal. Well, Workbench, doesn't really matter. Renew Workbench. There we go. Okay. And what I was looking at, I guess I killed PHP Storm. Whoops. Let's not do that, shall we? So let's bring PHP Storm back to life here. I don't know if it crashed on its own or I accidentally killed it in the process of closing everything. So I am using Stripe for Shift. So, it handles all the subscriptions, payments, cashier, specifically does most of that code. But one of the things inside of cashier or Stripe that makes it pretty easy is basically if you create this Stripe webhook controller, you kind of get automatic webhook event handling from Stripe. So you can handle invoice upcoming, invoices paid, all types of things like this. And basically you just respond with a 200, no content, whatever, and it's all good. So this is how it's going to get handled. Unfortunately, Stripe doesn't have a fancy, subscription renewed event. They really just have an invoice paid event, and then it's up to you to take a look at that invoice and kind of determine, here's the subscription that invoice was for, and go ahead and kind of, renew or update that accordingly. So again, a little bit annoying. There might be a better way. Someone like Dries might know. He's kind of the master of cashier, total cashier guru, and Stripe. He's been on like their podcasts and screencasts and so forth. He's on vacation though, so I don't want to bug him. So we're going to hack through it. He might tell me a better webhook that exists, but I think we can do it with invoices paid. That's what the Stripe documentation says to use. In fact, I've used it before already to kind of automatically invoice or send a subscription invoice. So I'm just going to piggyback this code here as kind of the entry point, and we're going to drive out that Workbench renewal part. So it really shouldn't be a lot of code. I think what's going to be more interesting today is probably the tests. So how to test kind of like a webhook, how to test firing an event, how to test, again, mail that's being queued. So we saw a little bit of that last week, so, if I get pressed for time, I may not go into that piece. But let's at least kind kind of drive out this webhook, drive out firing an event, drive out, listening for that event, those types of things. So, all right. Hey, Adrian, how's it going? All right, so let's get back to this. Now, right now, invoice paid basically just determines if they have a preference email for invoices, and if so, it sends them an invoice. I probably don't want to do this kind of exclusively anymore, so I think before we get started, what I want to do is probably refactor this code to fire off an event that's a bit more generic, and then multiple things can kind of listen for that event. So I can have something that listens that sends a subscription invoice, and I can have something that listens that will potentially handle the Workbench license renewal. So first things first, let's see if I already have a test for this, which I think I do. Good. Okay, so what I'm doing here is invoice paid returns 404 when customer not found. So we do have some stuff here where we basically explicitly call with the data. So we kind of explicitly call subject. That's interesting. It's interesting that I'm not doing, I would have expected that since it's a controller, I would have done this in like an HTTP kind of way. Here's what I'm going to do. Let's write a new test and kind of work through that, because I would have expected. Let's just see this for a second. Invoice paid returns 200. Let's just do something real simple here. So instead of calling subject directly, where I'm directly calling this method, let's actually attempt to call it payload. So it just gives us a payload. I think we can check the web routes to see. I'm pretty sure this is auto-registered, but Stripe, yeah, so they're posts to Stripe webhook. And then I think you have to send it like a very specific event name for this to work, which is probably why I shied away from it before. But let's actually kind of do this. Let's see if we can recreate this more of what I would expect. So what I would have expected was like this request, or sorry, this post, and then the URL is this, and then I send it, a specific payload. And I would get a response, of course. So I would have expected kind of an HTTP test, and then it would say something like response assert OK. And then we would need to send it basically the same data that I'm kind of sending before. So let's just chop that back in there and get us some formatting, although it looks like I have too many closing brackets there. And let's kind of get this formatted back the way it was. All right, cool. So there we go. That's a little better. So I think the tricky thing, though, is that if we go look at this webhook controller, so if you don't have a secret, then it shouldn't verify the webhook signature. So that should help. And then basically this decodes payload type. Here we go. So this is what we're going to have to kind of hack. We're going to have to hack a type, and it replaces dots with underscores, and then it studlies those. So we have handle, invoice, paid. So what I would think in our test is if we added, this just is top level type. So if we added type here of invoice paid, this should work. This sends an HTTP request without any signature or anything. We'll see if this works, but I would assume that this would work as long as we add our annotations for the test. And now I gotta bring up Docker. Let's see if this works, and then we're gonna write some new tests as a refactor of the old test to actually send an HTTP request so we can do some better testing and see that like a new event is going to be fired instead of all that specific code. And then we can just kind of push that down to the event level. So let's bring this live here, our Docker. We'll give that just a sec. We'll get another drink of coffee here. I'm almost done. It's kind of getting cold. Whoops. Anyway, I don't know if you can hear the iMac purring, but it's about to take off here. We're close. All right, so we assert, and just to keep this from exploding, let's just return response, no content, 200. All right. So for now, we're just going to kind of hack this and avoid any other code that would have been fired. And we'll do vendor, then PHP unit. Let's copy this test. And let's copy, or let's filter just our one test. Let's see if we can run this. So we're either going to get a nasty error because there's more stuff going on with Cashier and Stripe, or it works. And we got the nasty error. So let's see if we can solve this real quick. Trying to access array offset on value of type null. Oh, you know what I think it is? This is post.json. Let's try that again. Hey, there we go. All right, so let's make sure that that's working the way we want. So I'm going to drop this 200. No content should send 204 by default. So we should get now a status code exception. And if so, then that means that all the wiring that Stripe provides, Cashier provides, sorry, for the Stripe webhooks is all working, and we're doing much more of an integration style test. This is making sure that, you know, not only have we mapped this up the way we want, according to kind of like Cashier's conventional names and so forth, but we've registered the webhook, you know, route to handle Stripe webhooks and so forth. So I think this is exactly what we want. It's a much better test. I think it's a better place to start than what I had originally. So now what I want to do is kind of start backfilling some of this, but by pushing it down to kind of an event level. So what we can do is let's borrow this and kind of update our old test to actually send this new stuff here. So we'll bring this and we can say something like no content, or sorry, assert no content. Once we actually bring the response variable back, that should work the way we want. Okay, so invoice paid returns 404 when customer not found. So instead of handling an exception, we can actually do this and we can say response assert not found, right? And that's the same stuff we had before, so we can get rid of that. And let's just start copying these down to kind of all of the other stuff. So the payload here can remain the same, but instead of calling subject directly, yeah, see, I was doing really weird stuff here. I was actually like getting the response myself, but like getting its content and stuff. It's just kind of gross. I don't know how long ago I wrote that, but there's a better way to do it now. So let's say assert no content, and then nothing sent out, and our payload's a bit different here, but we're going to need this type. So let's just drop a payload there, and we can put payload up here. All right, let's keep with the convention here. So let's get response down here. We have some more payloads going on. So we're still going to get 204. There's no mail sent. So again, we're just kind of backfilling the tests that I had before. So, but instead of doing kind of this gross stuff here, now at this point, we really shouldn't be using subject anymore. Where are we using subject? Nowhere. All right, which means that I can now get rid of all of this test setup and this weird subject stuff, and we can just go back to sending a really nice, really clean Laravel provided HTTP test. So the one thing I forgot though, I think, was I didn't get this type for down here. So let's bring in this type. I'm gonna give myself a little breathing room there so we can see what's going on. So we faked the mail. We really didn't change anything other than instead of calling subject directly, again, we're now saying an HTTP post JSON request with the same payload, and we're able to make assertions, helpful assertions on that response. So if I go back to my code and I drop this out, hopefully all of these tests still pass. But now they're doing so with an HTTP request. Okay, great. They all pass. So we want to keep these tests, but now I think that we're back to like a good state. We're kind of doing incremental refactors here. So the first refactor was improving the test code that existed, because there's a better way to do this. Send an HTTP request. Great. But now the simple thing I want to do is really say invoice paid returns 404, not necessarily when the customer is not found, but when the subscription is potentially not found. Because there's really no way. Well, should I do customer or should I do subscription? I'm just thinking, I'm thinking out loud here. Invoice paid, I'm just trying to think when invoice paid gets fired. It doesn't always get fired for just subscriptions. What I'm trying to do here is determine, do I just get this event, or do I just receive this webhook and fire off event blindly, or do I want to add some logic to only fire this off provided, that it's for subscriptions, maybe? That's the part I'm not sure of. So I think what I would want to do is return a 404 if customer's not found. Let's start there. So I do think I would want to keep this. So invoice paid returns 404 when customer's not found. This is correct. But now what I want to do is do an event fake. And let's import that appropriately. So I want to kind of move to firing off events again. Instead of having all this code kind of in line, I just want to fire off an event and send Stripe back 204. Like there's really nothing Stripe needs to be aware of. We either worked with this stuff or we didn't. So what we could do is say event assert nothing dispatched is probably the way to go. Or assert not dispatched? Assert. Does this return? It returns a fake. Oh, okay. Some of these things always return. I always thought some of these are a bit weird inside of Laravel. Like some return things. Assert nothing dispatched, I think is what I'm after. Yeah. Assert nothing was dispatched. So let's run just this one again. And let's get back to filtering. Filter equals that. Oops, moving too quick. There we go. Okay, so failed asserting that 2 is identical to 0. Event fake. Test 35. Test line 35. Assert nothing dispatched. Assert nothing dispatched. Failed asserting that two unexpected events were dispatched. Really? Oh. I bet you underneath Stripe is firing off events. I bet you, sorry, I keep saying Stripe. I bet you Cashier is firing off events for the webhook underneath. We could just take a quick look at this code to kind of prove that. So we've got webhook received dispatch. I guarantee you that there it is, it fires off an event right there. Yeah, webhook handled. So there's the two events. So cashier automatically fires off the event that was dispatched, or the webhook event that was dispatched when it was received and then when it was handled. So there's our two events. So this assert nothing is not going to work. We're going to have to be a little more specific. So we can say something like assert not dispatched, and the event, we can just use like a named thing here. We could say something like stripe.invoice.paid. Let's do that. So for now, I'm just trying to recreate what we have. And I think in the recreation, it's going to become a lot easier to add additional logic to fire off either another custom event or, again, just a generic event that an invoice was paid. So let's leave that alone here just for a second. This is working the way we want. So that's been updated, but it's not really proving anything because we're not firing off events anyway. So this is the one that's actually going to drive out the code. So assert paid returns no content when invoice email not set. Now this is specific to kind of the current implementation. So we really want to move this to its own test. All right, so we're going to leave that alone. Invoice paid sends email, same thing here. I'm going to kill this so we can run this whole thing, move to its own test, and that's all of them. So what we want to do now is kind of keep this structure, keep this payload, I guess, of this new one. Let's borrow this for a second. So we're still going to send the 404 when we don't find it, but now we can say invoice paid fires event for, or well, it's really just fires event. So let's drop that in here. The customer is going to be user Stripe. We really don't care about the invoice ID at the moment. I'm not sure why we're separating that out. I'm not sure why we're separating that out, to be honest. But let's just copy this up here just for a second, and let's kind of whittle down through it. I think it's probably fine to send the invoice. I'm trying to determine, do I want to send very specific events such as, you know, invoice paid, and then send another one that's like subscription renewed? Do I want the webhook controller to be smart enough to dispatch the event, or do I want to keep it dumb and just send out a generic event and then hook in a lot of listeners, and then the listener kind of filters out, you know, what it cares about, right? So if I filter it out here, this is a little more complex to test, but I think the reason why I'm leaning towards filtering it out in the webhook controller is it just reduces a lot of chatter, right? Not only chatter and like events that are being fired and listeners that are listening and all that kind of stuff, but also chatter or noise in the code. I would have to, in every listener, have some kind of guard clauses, and I just feel like at an event level, you really just want to be handling the event, right? You're ready to do something with it. I don't think it makes sense to receive an event that you may not even do anything with. So I think in this case, there's the ability to filter it out, and as such, probably makes sense to do that. So anyway, let's kind of proceed forward with maybe firing like a somewhat specific event here. So we're always going to return 404 when the customer is not found, because we would never really do anything with anything if you're not even in our system. So that's kind of our first guard clause. So we don't send Stripe invoice paid. When invoice paid event, so yeah, invoice paid fires event. invoice paid fires event. This is going to be a little redundant for paid invoice. All right, so we're going to get the invoice out. We're going to pick off the subscription still. I don't think we're going to mess with the email preferences right now. So let's pull this off. And I don't even know if it matters that you, well, it does matter that you have a, okay, so all this is back to life again. And now what we would do is instead of mail fake, we would go back to our event fake. We're still going to get no content, but now we can say event assert dispatched stripe invoice paid. Just in case I ever have other systems, I think it makes sense to just kind of, you know, chop that down. And then I guess you get a closure here or a callback. Yeah. So here we would say function event, or well, let's just say event. And then I think you get the data. And then we would return, I don't know if you get the event and the data, or if you just get the data. I think for now, let's just return true, and let's dump data and dump event. You might just get one or the other. I always forget what you get. So let's run this and find out. I probably have to actually fire the event first. No test executed. Helps when you add your annotation. So let's do at test, and we should see this fail because the event's not fired. Then we're going to fire the event the way we think we should, and let's tighten up those expectations. So expected event was not dispatched. That makes sense. So let's go over here. So you have to actually exist as a user, but now what we're going to do instead is simply just say event, and the event is going to be stripe invoices paid, and I think data is what it takes. Am I doing that right? App dispatch args. I think it doesn't have a good signature, but I think you just send an array of arguments here. So our array of arguments here are going to be basically what we passed in here. So this is going to be like user ID. We're just going to send in a bunch of IDs. So the user ID, the object ID, which is going to be the invoice, and then object subscription, which is going to be the ID of the subscription. All right, so let's see what this gives us now. We should get those dumps. Okay, it actually worked exactly the way we thought. It sends in the event, which is just the name of the event, so that's straightforward. We were already testing for that in the first part, and then it does send in an array of the array of arguments that we would have received otherwise. So what we can do is go back to our test and tighten this up and probably just turn it into an arrow function. So we can just say something like data 0 is equal to user ID and data 1 is equal to invoice ID, and data 2 is equal to subscription ID. And let's convert it to an arrow function so I don't have to add all those in as like local vars. We can just break this on 2 lines. Okay, so this should still pass. We just kind of tightened up the actual assertion now, hopefully. Cool. Okay, so this works the way we want now. Again, we would just need to move this off, and in the interest of time, I'll probably save that for off stream. So let's start driving out, firing a new custom event if a subscription is renewed. I think that's a valuable event to have. Again, instead of just firing a generic Stripe invoice paid and then setting up a bunch of listeners, let's kind of filter those down or distill those into the events that the application would actually care about. I think that's a much better process, and this is the right place to kind of encapsulate that logic instead of registering a bunch of listeners that may or may not actually care about a generic invoice paid event. So that just feels like the right way to go, the more I kind of am talking about it, or thinking about it. So let's do the same thing here, and let's say invoice paid fires event for subscription renewal. All right. And to kind of make sure that this is doing what we want, we can say something like Stripe subscription renewed. So again, since this is going to do some filtering, we're going to need to make sure we can't just say assert nothing dispatched, because Cashier itself is going to fire some webhook events that we saw a minute ago. So we're going to need to kind of explicitly say all the kind of negative tests. Typically, I don't try to write all the negative paths because it's kind of just never ending. I just write what I care about. But we're not going to be able to do that in this case just because we're dealing with an integration style test. So we can say here, though, that it's not going to send the other one off, right? It's only going to send this Stripe invoice paid. And now, the interesting thing is this one will still send Stripe invoice paid, but we're not going to care really about that side of it anymore. We've already tested that, that sends the right stuff. It'd be pretty silly. It'd be pretty interesting if the code passed in one case and not the other case, right? Someone would have to go out of their way to add like some interesting logic. So what we'll do instead is just say, hey, you should always pretty much send assert dispatch Stripe invoice paid, but now you're also going to send assert dispatched on this renewed. And here we would do something really similar to what we had above. We just don't care about the invoice necessarily anymore. So let's send out the same kind of event. Oops, too far. We'll send out the same kind of event, and we'll say function event data. I don't even know if I care about the user in this case. I really only care about the subscription. So we really just care that data 0 is now going to be that subscription. Yeah, I think this is fine. So we're still going to set everything up again just to kind of make sure that it all works. And you know what? What's the harm? Let's just leave this too, right? Let's just keep it. May as well keep the test strict. We've already written all that. It gives us a little more test variance because of faker and all that stuff. So let's just kind of keep that going. If this were a much larger test, I would say don't do that. But we have the code. We're copy pasting anyway. Here we go. So we're going to run the whole test now. We should get one failure. This was not dispatched, so we want it to be. So now let's go back here. And we'll say event invoice paid. Okay, but now we're going to do some filtering here. Well, there is no filtering here. Let's just send this out for now. So we'll say Stripe dot subscription dot renewed. We said renewed, right? Renewed, yeah, okay, good. And then this is going to receive the payload for the subscription. You know what? Probably going to need more data than just the subscription. Probably going to need a little more data than just the subscription. We're probably going to want like the whole object, to be honest. Or are we faking that? We'd have to go look at Stripe to see what that looks like. Let's just let's write this test for now and get it passing. We may need to tweak some of this based on the actual payload that Stripe sends off. Okay, so we've kind of like flipped the issue now, right? For subscription renewal. Okay, so we're getting a passing on the first one, but this is actually sending a subscription renewal when we don't want it to. And it's still saying when we do want it to that it's not dispatched. So let's take a look here. And that's because I dropped that out of an array. I would expect the middle test to fail. So let's get back to that. And that's going to drive us out to write some logic. But we got to look at the webhook first. Okay, good. The middle test is failing now. Invoice paid fires event for paid invoice, but it shouldn't fire renewed. And that's because we now need to tweak our payload to help the code, drive out the code to kind of differentiate the logic. Because like, you know, this should only dispatch or fire for, you know, billing or like subscriptions being renewed, right? That's kind of what we're after here. So let's go out to Stripe docs invoice object. Yeah, that's good. Let's go out here and see what we get. Yeah. I think there's going to be something in here that we kind of care about, right? Not necessarily the lines or anything, but there's going to be some stuff in here, period start and end. That's going to help us kind of know, like, you know, are we getting all that stuff out or not? So, billing reason. Let's just see if these are listed in here. Billing reason. There we go. Okay, indicates the reason why the invoice created. Billing cycle indicates an invoice created by a subscription advancing into a new period. Perfect. That is what we want. Billing reason. I figured that was on the right track. This is going to be underneath the invoice itself. I think this is what is gonna drive out the payload a little bit better, because right now I think I'm just kind of hacking this payload. So this is actually underneath the invoice object. So let's get this payload looking a little better in our tests, because right now I think what I'm doing is just saying object ID subscription. Yeah, there we go. Okay, good. So we need billing reason is equal to that, right? Yes. Cool. Okay. Yeah, see, I'm just kind of hacking this and saying like customer, but really these would be objects. They wouldn't be the ID itself. But this is going to help us kind of push forward. So the other one isn't going to have like this billing cycle necessarily. It's just going to be like a generic invoice. So here we'll just say something like billing reason, you know, manual. We'll just keep that there. Or well, do they have other names? Let's see here. Subscription created. Subscription is set for all old invoices to indicate. Manual is set for all invoices unrelated to a subscription. Yeah, that's fine. Let's just leave it manual, just to kind of differentiate. Okay, so this should still have all the same failures, but it's now going to drive us out to say, add the logic to say, look, we're not going to fire a subscription renewal event unless that billing cycle is what we expect. So now we can say if payload data object billing reason is equal to, what was that called? Let's take it from the docs. Subscription cycle. Then we would send this, and now I'm going to comment this out just to make sure we're not getting any kind of false positives here. And now I think we're going to be green. Excellent. Okay, I think this is enough. So let's kind of recap here for a second, because there was a little bit of bouncing back and forth there. Okay, so when we come in to handle invoice paid, all of that's wired up for us automatically by Cashier. Stripe's going to send us a standard webhook payload that has data and object, and that object is going to be, from the documentation, an invoice object. And within there, there's going to be billing reason, there's going to be customer information, there's going to be subscription information, there's going to be a lot of information that we want, right? But first, we're going to make sure that we actually have a customer matching that Stripe ID, because if we don't, then we don't even need to do anything at all. So we have a test case to prove that with the 404 first or fail that's happening from Laravel. This is going to throw method not found, or sorry, model not found, which ultimately results in a 404. So we've tested that out. So long as a customer exists, we're always going to fire a new custom event called Stripe invoice paid, and we're going to send that out with the user just to be helpful, and then the invoice that was actually paid, and then I guess for whatever reason the subscription. We'll look into that in a second. It might start making sense just to send, the whole object. That's kind of like a standard refactor, preserve whole object. I don't know. We'll see if it makes sense. And then if the billing reason for this invoice being paid was a subscription cycle, meaning it's going to be a subscription renewal, then we're going to fire another new custom event that we're going to drive out here in just a second. So the last thing I want to do is this commented code and these commented tests. I want to bring these back to life. So what I'm going to do is kind of this touchpoint testing that I've talked about before. I'm going to take this code and temporarily go over to my event service provider, and I'm going to listen for one of these new custom events. And I've got a bunch of other ones in here. So let's just say something like event listen, and this is Stripe invoice paid. And the function is going to receive from the code we just had the user ID, what is this? This is the invoice ID, and then subscription. And it's kind of like subscription data, which is a bit gross. I'm going to leave this commented out for now because I want to drive this back out by now moving the tests over to the event service provider. So let's bring up the event service provider test, and let's scroll down to the bottom. All right, we got a lot of stuff happening here, but let's bring over these tests that I commented out. So here's my to-dos. I want these two tests. And really it should be the exact same code. We just need to fix some of the wiring. So we know for the moment we're done with this test. Again, I might do some refactoring on the data that's being passed in, but for the most part we know we're done writing those specific tests. So let's drop these back in here. And what I want to do is now bring these back to life kind of one by one. So let's say test at test. I cannot type today. So we'll say something like, what are we naming these? Let's follow my naming. It sets an appropriate. All right. So we'll say something like, it doesn't return no content. It basically, we'll just say it does nothing when invoice email not set. All right. So we don't have this payload anymore. And it doesn't seem like any of this other data is going to matter. So I can get rid of that payload. We're going to keep mail fake. Instead of sending this payload now, though, we are going to fire our own event, in this case, stripe.invoice.paid, with user ID, null, and null, because none of that other stuff should even end up being checked. And what we're going to do is assert that nothing was sent and nothing was queued. Oh, you know what? I think working on this is when I added a assert. I think assert not sent, or assert nothing sent, maybe? Nothing sent. I think assert nothing sent is a new one that I added recently. That kind of just, it does them both. Nothing outgoing. There we go. That's what I'm after. Which is interesting. It's not, that's not in the, that's not a method tag. Come on. Don't be that way. Yeah, we need to add that. Nothing outgoing. This needs to get added. A little PR after the fact there. Yeah, we need some completion there. That looks better. All right, cool. So yeah, I'm gonna leave this in here for now, but I can make a quick PR to kind of make sure that that gets highlighted, because I knew there was one that was added, but I wasn't getting auto completion because it's not in those little method doc blocks or class doc block. Okay, cool. So nothing outgoing, good. All right, and then let's bring this test back to life as well. So at tests, so same thing here. It sends email, and we can get rid of the no content. We can just say when invoice email is set. Okay, so invoice is set. Subscription doesn't really matter. We pull out the user, we set their preference. We don't need the payload anymore, but instead we will send this other stuff here. So we're going to leave that, and here's where we're going to say event Stripe invoice created. And now is where I want to pull out. Now is where I would want to pull this out and say user ID, invoice ID, subscription ID. And we're not going to do that. Nothing sent, but it was queued, and there's all of our stuff that was queued. All right, cool. So now I should be able to get rid of these. Okay, let's run these one by one. And at this point, we should be fully refactored and have our new kind of approach for kind of doing these things. So let's do this. Let's see if this works. Last bit of coffee here. It does. Okay, cool. So makes me always a little nervous when it works right away. Let's do this. Let's just change that to payment. Actually, that's not going to prove anything because, of course, it would still not be sent. Yeah. All right. Well, let's do this then. Let's uncomment that. And, oh, we don't have the user. This is going to be invoice ID. And this is going to be subscription. I still think there's an opportunity to kind of go through that. Let's just say Jason at whatever.com. I'm just trying to trigger a failure here to prove that we're like on the right track. All right, cool. So class app providers, well, not cool, but we need to import this class. Now we should get a proper failure. Okay, the following mail reels were queued unexpectedly, that one. So failed asserting that an array is empty. Okay, so what we can do is bring this back out. See, now this listener originally expected that user. So we're gonna have to kind of pull that user back out, which I think is a bit annoying. I wonder if we should just pass the user into this. I always forget, maybe those that are still with me in the chat, let me know. At one point in time, there was discussion that it was more efficient in Laravel when you were, you know, passing data to events that you should pass by ID, not necessarily the whole model. Just because of like the underlying serialization and so forth. I don't know if that's a thing. I know there's been a lot of, you know, I remember this like years ago. So this was probably like Laravel 5. So I would imagine in Laravel 9, like that's been considered and optimized in a way. Because I know if you look at like the failed jobs table in the data payload, you know, they're definitely serializing it in a certain way, where it's efficient. It's kind of just serializing the ID anyway, I believe. I don't think it serializes the entire object anymore. So anyway, all that is to say, I wonder if we should just continue to pass the user around as expected. But anyway, user find or fail. We'll just say user ID. So we'll just pull it out ourselves, but might be a little better if we, you know, change the way we kind of did that. So anyway, let's see if this passes now. Good, it does. Okay, because we added our check back in. So now we should be able to go back to and say email. All right, let's format that. What's wrong with this? Missing return statement. You're supposed to return from a event listener? I don't know that. All right, so that's still passing, and now we need to send this one. So let's filter just this. And I would imagine this is probably going to fail. Yeah, and the reason that's failing is because I kind of messed with this. We're going to send in the ID, but mailable invoice user is user. I think the issue now is if we go back to the event service provider, I passed in user ID, so I kind of broke that. So I think this will look a little better. Nope. All right, let's see why mailable was not queued. Let's see why this wasn't queued. Let's slow down and take a look at this test a little bit better. So mailable has to email. Mailable user is user. So we pass in the user ID, invoice ID, and subscription ID. That should all be good. Assert nothing sent. That's a little odd, but the point is we're queuing it, not sending it. Let's drop off this user part. I think it might be the user that's crapping out. Nope. Let's just keep taking these off until this passes the way we want. Still doesn't pass. All right. Did we at least set the email correctly? Oh wait, I think I hit up arrow too many times. There we go. No, it is still failing. All right, is it even queued at all? It's not even queued at all, so something else is wrong here. Oh, Stripe invoice created. I think I was playing around with that earlier. All right, let's just backfill what we did here. All right, so that's green. So let's bring some of this back to life. We should be able to bring all of it back to life and then correctly say paid here. I think we were toying around with that a minute ago. All right, good. So this works the way we want now. I think there's going to be some changing around with this, and I think to formalize this a little better, I may end up making an event, like an actual event, instead of kind of a named event, just to kind of tidy up this data a bit. It's starting to get a little confusing to me, you know, what's getting passed in here. Is this the whole subscription or is this just the subscription ID? Because if we look at this, it's the subscription ID, but this passes in the whole user. I just think it kind of starts getting a little bit weird. And why is that user different than the subscription user, right? Like, I guess maybe they're not they're not, it doesn't have to be a subscription. It could just be like a different invoice. I don't know when you would get an invoice that's not a subscription inside a Shift. I don't think I have that anywhere, but it seems like I do. Yeah, that's really strange. I think I'll think on that more offline. Let's wrap this up, I think, for now, by just kind of driving out our other, the other side of this. So it's going to look really, really similar to this. So I think what I'll do is I'll pseudocode out the tests just to kind of get one of them started. So we can say something like it does nothing when not a latest plan. How about that? So we don't care about a user necessarily anymore. What we do care about is a subscription. And the subscription can just be subscription factory create. And I don't know if I have something like latest. Let's go look at this. Whoops. Let's go look at this subscription factory. I'm not sure if I have like a latest plan. Yeah, see, it does LTS. I don't have one that's specific for an LTS plan. So I think what's going to make sense is probably to make some kind of like, let's make a little state here, function plan. Well, technically it's going to be shifty plan, and then plan, you don't have to pass it in, and here we'll say something like return this state. That's a method call, whoops, right in the old school stuff here. And then this will be stripe plan equals to plan, or what do we want to call this? I guess the default. Yeah, I guess we'll just keep it the default. If you don't pass a plan in, you'll just remain the LTS plan. It's kind of crazy. Yeah, I think that's fine now. Let's do this. Shifty plan, and then we'll say plan. I think we have one for like, yeah, there we go, for latest. Cool. It's a bit long, but it allows me to fluctuate this. This is something I picked up the other day. I don't know if it was on Twitter or maybe our group Telegram chat, but like, you know, I could make like shifty plan latest unlimited. You know, I could make like 10 different states, but sometimes it's actually nice to give your state a little bit of like dynamic behavior. You can pass in arguments, of course, just like any other method. So I think that's a bit helpful. Okay, so what we want to do here is if you did have a plan latest, when we fired off this Stripe subscription renewed is what we called this, and we're just going to pass in this kind of subscription. Actually, we pass in a bunch of subscription data. So this is kind of like data, and this is where we start to fluctuate. And I think I'm going to have to do things like off stream. But for now, we can say something like ID is equal to subscription ID, not a semicolon. How about a comma? Okay, and so what I would want to test for here is probably something for now. I would want to say something like new license is created in database with same end date as subscription end date, right? and that's going to come out of the payload as well. So again, these are the pieces I'm going to need to go pull from a proper Stripe kind of payload. So I can just get in the dashboard and go find a recent event that was fired, and that's going to give me like some real data that I can actually plug into here. So I'm mimicking what's going on. And then I would ultimately want to send email with new renewed license key. So I am going to end up sending some email, so it won't necessarily be a certain nothing is outgoing, but we can start to drive this out with not a latest plan. So what I can do is just kind of leave this the default, which is kind of a bit cryptic, because if I ever change the default factory, which I really try not to do, this wouldn't work the way we wanted. So I am going to say something like LTS. So let's do this, and to do little guy there. And we can get this part working correctly. So this is at least gonna make sure that we have kind of this set up, and I think that's where I'll stop this stream for today, since this is mostly ended up being kind of a refactor of existing, but I think it's nice because you still kind of see exactly how all the important pieces, right? You still kind of see how we are gonna test with events, we drove things out with the webhooks. It's all really the same code, it's just I'm actually typing it out now, so. Okay, so this does nothing, of course, because nothing was actually registered. So let's actually put some real code over here, right? So let's copy this, and we can say something like Stripe subscription renewed, and this is going to be the subscription data is really what that's going to be. And what we can do now is we can start to kind of mess around in this payload. So I'm just going to go back to calling this data, and we can say something like subscription equals subscription find or fail subscription. And we could write a test here now that there's an exception thrown when it fails. That's not data, this is actually data, and this will be ID, we think. And again, this might need to get changed, but we'll do that, and then we'll basically say something like if subscription, I think it's Stripe plan, is not equal to plan Stripe ID for latest, then what would we return? All right, and then otherwise we're going to send an email, right? And again, just to avoid any issues here, we can say something like jason@whatever.com, and we'll just pass this with null and null and null. So if we run this, we should still pass, but what I'm going to do is move the mail thing above, or at least comment out our little guard clause there. And we'll see that it should end up failing because it did send an email. And if so, then we know that the wiring's there, we're on the right track. I just got to write out a bunch of stuff. There we go. The following mails were sent unexpectedly. Subscription invoice, it's not empty. So we're on the right track here with the subscription. What I got to do now is go out to Stripe, kind of get a proper payload, start pulling out these right pieces. And here is where we're basically going to say, create new Workbench license. That's pretty straightforward. It's just a model create, and then we basically are going to send the same email. So this is kind of to do update with new license renewal email. So send, new license renewal email. So, and I may just piggyback the email I already have and pass it like, some kind of true or false, like subscription renewal flag, and just, change a little bit of the wording in there so I don't have like 16 different emails for, plan or subscription renewals. So I think that's pretty good. So I think let's just take one more look here. We should have everything in here passing now for the test that we do have. So let's just make sure I didn't break anything by running both this and the webhook controller test in its entirety. And if so, then we're green and we'll end the stream there. It's not complete, but it's a good code stopping point for where we are. So these are just all the events in here that are running. And let's go ahead and get that other test that we were talking about, this Stripe controller test. Let's just copy the reference to that. And let's make sure this works too. And then we're right at about an hour, so I'm going to stop it there. Okay, great. Everything's passing. So the test that we pulled over and refactored are passing. We're on the way for a new test to drive out the license sending. And then we, again, refactored the Stripe webhook controller to be a better test by using HTTP tests that Laravel gives us. That way we can properly assert the response. We can assert that all of our wiring's correct. I might have misnamed a method that I was calling it in a very unit style before that didn't actually wire up correctly for Stripe or Cashier. So, you know, I think it's a lot better of a test, and we're kind of filtering out what type of events we want to fire based on that. So I'm going to go back and clean up those payloads. I think, again, we saw that it was a bit confusing. So I think that'll be the next step. I'll do that off stream because who wants to see me dig around Stripe event payloads, you know, massive payloads, and kind of bringing those over line by line. And again, the tests that we're missing here are really just more of the same. We're just asserting that mail was sent like we saw before, and in this case, we'll probably assert that the database has a new license key that was generated with the same end date as the subscription that came across. So pretty straightforward stuff. Seen it all before in these streams. So with that, I will end things. Thank you all for attending live or watching in the future, and I'll see everybody next week.